She called me a ghost before I even had a chance to prove I was still alive. I was 26 years old, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, holding a mug of coffee my aunt had poured for me, when my mother walked in and looked at me the way you look at something you accidentally left out too long. Not with anger, not even with guilt, just this flat, tired recognition, like she'd been waiting for me to show up and ruin everything. "You were never supposed to come back," she said. Not to me, exactly, more to the room. I set the mug down. I didn't say anything, and I think that was the moment I understood that whatever I thought this visit was going to be, a reconciliation, a conversation, some kind of beginning, it was going to be none of those things. My name is Cecily. I'm the daughter she introduced at family dinners as her independent one, which I later understood was her way of saying I was the one she didn't have to think about. I was the one who left for college on a merit scholarship, got an apartment in Philadelphia by 22, called home every Sunday out of habit more than love. I thought distance was healthy. I thought we were fine. I didn't know she had already decided what to do with me long before I ever walked back through that door. Let me start from the beginning, because the ending doesn't make sense without it. My grandmother, my mother's mother, died in the spring. She was 81 and her name was Rosalie, and she was the kind of woman who pressed folded $20 bills into your palm when she hugged you goodbye, like she knew money was just love made portable. She smelled like lavender and coffee. She taught me how to play gin rummy and how to hem a skirt and how to say no to people who didn't deserve a yes. She left a will. That part wasn't surprising. What was surprising, to me anyway, was what it said. My grandmother had a house in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Nothing extravagant, but paid off, and in a market like that, worth somewhere around $380,000. She also had a savings account with about $210,000 in it, built slowly and carefully over 50 years of working as a bookkeeper. She had a small investment portfolio that her late husband had started in the 70s, and she'd quietly managed ever since. Altogether, the estate was valued at just under $650,000. She left it to me. Not to my mother, not split between us, not held in trust with conditions. To me, directly, with a letter attached that the attorney read aloud while my mother sat across the table with her hands folded very still as in her lap. The letter said, "Cecily has always understood that things are earned, not owed. I trust her to use this well. I hope she finds a life that suits her." My mother did not cry. She thanked the attorney, gathered her coat and her purse, and walked out to her car. She didn't look at me once. That was March. By June, she had contested the will. I know how this sounds. I know you're thinking, okay, a family dispute over money. People do that. It's ugly, but it's not unusual. And you'd be right that it's not unusual. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, because I was in Philadelphia paying rent and going to work and living my entirely ordinary life, was that my mother hadn't just filed a legal challenge. She had spent those 3 months building a story. The story was this. My grandmother had not been of sound mind when she signed the updated will. She had been, according to my mother, confused and easily influenced in her final years. She had documents. Records from a doctor I'd never heard of, notes from a care facility my grandmother had visited exactly twice for routine checkups, statements from 2 neighbors who said they'd noticed Rosalie seemed different toward the end. And then there was the other part, the part where my mother told the probate court that I had not been in contact with my grandmother for over a year before her death. That I had in fact cut off the relationship. That my grandmother had mentioned to her many times that she missed me and couldn't understand why I'd stopped calling. None of that was true. I have my phone records. I have emails. I have a birthday card my grandmother sent me in February, 6 weeks before she died, with a recipe for her apple cake tucked inside and a note that said she was proud of me and to keep going. I have a voicemail she left me in January that I have never been able to delete, where she talks for 4 minutes about a documentary she watched and a bird she'd seen at the feeder and whether I thought she should get a new couch. But I didn't know I was going to need any of that, because I didn't know I was being erased. My mother has a gift for quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that operates in the background while you're looking elsewhere. She never yelled. She never made scenes. She was this kind of woman who could dismantle something completely and leave the wreckage looking like it had always been that way. I found out about the probate challenge from my aunt. My grandmother's younger sister, Rosalie's only sibling still living, a 78-year-old woman named Beverly, who called me on a Tuesday afternoon from a number I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize it. "Cecily," she said, "I don't want to alarm you, but I think you need to get a lawyer." I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor, I just did. Beverly explained it slowly and carefully, the way she explained everything. My mother had hired an estate attorney. The case was already filed. There was a hearing scheduled for September. And there was something else. Something Beverly hesitated over before she said it. "Your mother has been telling people you were estranged from Rosalie. She's been saying it for months. To the neighbors. At the church. To anyone who might be a witness." I pressed my hand flat against the linoleum. It was cold. I focused on that. "She's been building this for a while," Beverly said. "I don't think this started after Rosalie died, sweetheart. I think it started before. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and I went back through every interaction with my mother over the past 2 years, and I tried to find the seams. The moments where something was slightly off, where a question felt like it was gathering information, where a conversation circled back in a way that felt less like catching up and more like cataloguing. I found them. Once I knew what to look for, I found them everywhere. The Christmas call where she'd asked, very casually, how often I spoke to Grandma Rosalie. The spring visit, where she'd asked whether I'd made it to Grandma's birthday. The offhand comment the previous fall. "Rosalie mentioned she hadn't heard from you in a while. I'm sure you've just been busy." Which I had accepted and felt briefly guilty about, because that was what I was supposed to do. She was building a timeline. She was building witnesses. She was doing it so slowly and so quietly that I had walked right through the construction and never noticed the scaffolding. I hired an attorney. Her name was Philippa, and she was 53 years old and had done estate litigation for 20 years, and had the kind of calm that comes from having seen everything. She sat across from me in her office in Center City and listened to the whole story without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Tell me everything you have. Documents, communications, anything." I had a lot. That was the thing my mother hadn't counted on. That I am, by nature, a person who keeps things. Not out of sentimentality, necessarily, just a habit my grandmother had given me, actually. "You never know what's going to matter later," she used to say. So I kept emails, I kept texts, I kept voicemails. I kept a letter she'd sent me 3 Christmases ago about how much she loved me and how she'd told her attorney to make sure I was taken care of. That last one. That one mattered. Philippa looked at it for a long time. Then she set it down and said, "This is a pattern. What your mother built is a pattern, and we can dismantle it with documentation." The hearing was in September. I drove back to Pennsylvania in August to start preparing, and that was when I made the mistake of going to see my mother first. I told myself it was a last attempt. I told myself maybe there was still a version of this, where we sat down and she explained something I was missing, some context that would make sense of all of it. I don't know if I believed that. I think I just needed to look her in the eye. I knocked on the door of the house I grew up in. She answered in her reading glasses, and when she saw me, something moved across her face. Not guilt, not relief, not even surprise. Just a kind of calculation. She let me in. She poured me coffee. And I waited. I waited because she was the one who had done something. I waited because I wanted her to say it first. And eventually, after 20 minutes of talking about the weather and whether I was eating enough and how her garden had done this summer, I said, "Why are you doing this?" She set her mug down. "Because that money belongs here," she said. "It belongs in this family." Rosalie didn't understand what she was doing. She was confused, and she paused and looked at me. "Someone influenced her." "I didn't influence her. You were always her favorite. Everyone knew that. It wasn't fair." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had driven me to school every morning for 12 years, and taught me how to drive and sat in the front row of my college graduation. I looked at her and I tried to find the person I had thought she was. I wasn't her favorite, I said. She just loved me. That's different. My mother's face did something then. A flicker of something real, something that might have been grief or regret or just the echo of a person she used to be. And then it was gone. You should talk to your attorney, she said. I think it's better if we don't speak before the hearing. I drove back to my Aunt Beverly's house. I sat in her kitchen and she made me chamomile tea and didn't ask me what happened. She just sat across from me and let me be there, and after a while I told her anyway, and she listened, and when I was done, she said, "She's been carrying something for a long time, Cecily. I don't know what, but it's not about the money. The money is just the shape of it." I don't know if that made me feel better or worse. Both, maybe. September came. The hearing was a Thursday morning in a courtroom in Lancaster County that smelled like carpet and old coffee. My mother sat at the table to the left with her attorney, a man in his 50s who kept uncapping and recapping his pen. I sat to the right with Philippa. Beverly was in the gallery. She had insisted on coming. She wore a navy blue blazer and her late husband's watch, and she looked like someone who had been waiting a long time to say something true in a room that was required to listen. My mother's attorney made his argument. The will was the product of undue influence. My grandmother had been isolated and confused. I had cultivated a relationship with her specifically to manipulate her estate planning. There were witnesses, the neighbors, the doctor's records, a statement from someone at the church who said my grandmother had seemed unlike herself in the months before her death. And then Philippa stood up. She was efficient. That's the best way I can describe it. She did not perform. She did not editorialize. She simply laid things down, one after another, and let them speak. The voicemails. My grandmother, in her own voice, 2 months before she died, laughing about a bird at her feeder and asking me about my couch situation. Completely lucid, completely herself. The phone records. 37 calls between me and my grandmother in the 12 months before her death, an average of 3 calls per month, not estrangement, contact. The emails, printed and organized by date. My grandmother asking me questions about technology and recipes and the neighborhood I lived in, me answering. Back and forth, ordinary and continuous, for years. The letter. The Christmas letter where my grandmother had written, in her own handwriting, that she had already spoken to her attorney about making sure I was provided for, and that she wanted me to have what she'd built because she trusted me to build something with it. And then Beverly, on the stand, speaking slowly and very clearly. Beverly testified that she had spoken to my grandmother every week for 80 years. She testified that my grandmother had told her, directly, that she had updated her will and why. She testified that my grandmother had been clear and sharp and purposeful right up until 2 weeks before she died. She testified that the woman described by my mother's witnesses, confused, isolated, easily led, was not a woman she recognized, and then she said something no one had scripted. Rosalie told me, Beverly said, that she was worried about what would happen to Cecily after she was gone. Not because Cecily couldn't take care of herself. Because Rosalie knew her daughter, and she wanted to make sure there was something Vera couldn't reach. The courtroom went quiet. My mother's name is Vera. I had not heard Beverly say it out loud in years. It landed like something solid. The judge recessed for 2 days. When she came back, she denied the challenge. The will stood. The estate transferred to me. My mother did not look at me when the ruling was read. She gathered her coat and her purse, and she walked out the same way she had walked out of the attorney's office in March, with her hands at her sides and her face composed into something that didn't look like anything at all. I didn't follow her. I didn't try. I thought about what Beverly had said in the kitchen. It's not about the money is just the shape of it. And I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be the daughter who didn't ask for too much, who didn't need too much, who could be called independent and take it as a compliment. My grandmother had known. That was the thing I kept coming back to. She had known, and she had done the one thing she could do, and she had left me a letter about it, so that even from wherever she was now, I would understand that someone had seen me clearly. I sold the Lancaster house 8 months later. I didn't keep it. It wasn't about the house. I took what the sale gave me and I paid off my student loans, which felt less like freedom than I'd expected, more like finally putting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten the weight of it. I kept a portion of my grandmother's savings exactly as she had kept it, in a conservative account I check once a quarter. I started a small emergency fund for Beverly, who had refused any money and then accepted it when I framed it as Rosalie's wish, because that was the only argument Beverly couldn't counter. I haven't spoken to my mother since the courthouse. I've thought about what I would say if I did. I've had whole conversations with her in the car, alone, where I ask her when it started. Whether she looked at me her whole life and calculated, or whether it crept up on her slowly the way bad things sometimes do, I don't have an answer. I don't think she would give me an honest one, even if I asked. What I know is this. My grandmother sat down with an attorney when she was 80 years old and clear in her mind, and she made a decision. She did it quietly, the way she did most things. She did it without telling me, because she knew I would have told her it wasn't necessary. She did it because she loved me in the particular way she had always loved me. Practically, with her eyes open. Planning ahead, I keep the voicemail on my phone. I'll probably keep it forever. In it, my grandmother talks about a cardinal she saw at the feeder that morning. She says she never gets tired of them. She says she's been watching birds her whole life and somehow they still surprise her. She laughs a little at herself for that. Then she says, before she hangs up, "All right, sweetheart, I'll talk to you soon." She didn't know it was the last one, neither did I. But I think she knew what mattered. I think she always did, and so in the end did I.